just going to look at a sermon entitled Satisfaction. We'll be looking at about 5 things that make human beings satisfied. So when we look at Psalm 17, where this lesson will come from, we find that David is in the fight of his life. Once again, just like all the time he's in a fight for his life, whether it's as a teenager against Goliath, or whether he's fighting the bear, fighting the lion to protect the sheep, or, just running from Saul, all kinds of enemies. He's always got problems going on for some reason. But here the prospect of death was distressing him. So he naturally turns to the Creator. That's what we should do. He recounts his lifelong service to God, then contrasts it to the lives of those seeking to destroy him. He's kind of saying, look at my life, look at their lives, and, isn't my life kind of more important in your service, Lord? But as he goes through this, it's kind of a humbling, it's not that he's bragging about it or boasting about it. He's just pointing some things out about, look at the enemies and look what they're doing. It's kind of like, why do I have to go through these things if I'm serving you, Lord? So he ends the psalm with a discussion on what satisfies men, human beings, men and women both, really. Psalm 17, verses 13 through 15, David writes, "Arise, O Lord, confront him, subdue him," that's the enemies, "deliver my soul from the wicked by your sword, from men by your hand, O Lord, from men of the world whose portion is in this life." So, number one, their portion is in this life. Worldly things, material things. Secondly, you fill their womb with treasures. Men don't have wombs. So it's a figurative thing. The thing that they want to produce is treasure. That satisfies them. They are satisfied with children, and they leave their abundance to their infants. In other words, not only do they aggregate an abundance of wealth for themselves, they want to make sure they're passing it on down to their children, see? Which, listen, the Bible tells us we need to set something aside for our old age and for our children. It's good to give an inheritance to our children, but theirs, it's kind of differs. They don't care different. They don't care how they get it, how they accumulate it, and they want to invest that power going to the next generation. Verse 15, "As for me," and this is where the contrast really comes, "As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. When I awake, I shall be satisfied with your likeness." When it comes down to the end, when death comes, it's like Job says, "Naked I came into this world, naked I'm going to leave it." I'll just be satisfied with seeing God face to face. So that's what life is all about, getting to that point. And that needs to be the satisfaction that we see. So worldly men seem satisfied with accumulating material possessions, passing them on to their children, make sure that name carries on. But the God-fearing man will be satisfied with being Christ-like in this life and seeing God's face in eternity. So men seek satisfaction in different ways. 5 of them are common. Number 1, men seek satisfaction in physical pleasures. Physical pleasures. And there are many things in this life that are both pleasurable and morally acceptable. Okay? Not everything is bad simply because it's pleasurable. Now, you've got groups of people, and they've always been around, that believed that anything that was pleasurable was bad. So you had people who became, in Christianity especially, monks, right? Well, they kind of borrowed that from Buddhism and some of the other religions, where they didn't take any money, If they accepted any money, it went into a common treasury. As long as they had food to eat and someplace to lay their head, they were, what's that word? Satisfied, see? Didn't care about material wealth or anything of that nature. They were called ascetics. And you had people like that. John the Immerser was said to be an ascetic, but really he lived the life of one who was separated from worldly things, but yet he was probably more an Essene than anything, someone who was just serving the kingdom of God. And he didn't care about a lot of physical things. But there are a lot of physical things, material things that are pleasurable and morally acceptable. It's all right to have a little bit of fun every now and then, right? What is it the book of Ecclesiastes says? There's a time to rejoice and there's a time to mourn and all kinds of different things. The problem is what becomes the focus of life. If the focus of life is merely to have that material pleasure, then life isn't focused on something that's going to bring satisfaction later on in eternity. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 6 talks about a woman, and not a woman, but women in general, so to speak. Just reading the text, but she who is self-indulgent is dead even while she lives. And, you know, the early church wanted to take care of the widows. And apparently there was a roll of widows that, you know, the husband was gone, they didn't have any children to take care of them, so the church would take care of them, see that their needs were met, but they had to go and help people if they were physically capable of doing so. They would go to people's homes and help the sick and prepare meals and things like that. And there were several warnings, you know, hey, don't spread tales from house to house. You go to this house and you see something that's maybe not kosher, you know, don't go to the next house and be gossiping about what you saw in the other house, all kinds of things like that. But what was it? Don't put a widow on the roll who's under, what, 60 years of age? It's like, why not? Because she'll want to marry again. She'll want to marry again. And there's nothing wrong with a widow marrying again. But the problem is, she wants to get married, and that's the goal in life, then hey, go find a man, get married. But there would I think the force of it is that there would be some who would pervert the system, use the system for gain until that opportunity come around. And what it was like a welfare system for those who could not help themselves. But again, watch out for the indulgence of the flesh. And that's just not for women, that's for men too, right? We've all got to be careful. Note Paul's warning to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Paul writes, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. Well, when was that? Well, it's been since the time that Christ came, the first time. The church has always lived in times of difficulty. First real big time of difficulty was at the time that Timothy was living. And right up to AD 70, when Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed. There was all kinds of persecution going on then. But those things still continue today. Why? Starting with verse 2, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, heartless, unappeasable, can't do anything to please them, right? Slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not loving good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. People are going to be like that. And Paul says, careful, Timothy, because sometimes you'll find people like that. Where? In the church. In the assembly. You'll just find them. Why? Because they're human beings. The church is made up of human beings. So be careful. Keep teaching. Keep pressing forward. There are going to be times of difficulties, and you got to watch that people like that don't get in control of the church, because then you have situations like develop that John talks about in 2 John and 3 John. Okay, so David says their portion is in this world only. The people who are like that, what Paul mentions in 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 1 through 4, their portion is in this world only. They're not going to have anything good in eternity. It's going to be punishment in eternity. Verses 13 and the first part of verse 14 of Psalm 17. Arise, O Lord, confront him, subdue him, deliver my soul from the wicked by your sword, from men by your hand, O Lord, from men by the world whose portion is in this life. Give them what they deserve, but save me, deliver me from them. Okay? Deliver me from what they're trying to do, because David's good example was a bad example for them, right? Because when David would go out and do good, David wasn't perfect. But when David would go out and do good, it made the bad people look really, really bad. And, you know, bad people don't need a whole lot of good people around to make them look worse. And they don't like it when there's good people around. And I think that's a lot of the problem that we have in the country today, in our country. There are people fighting the good fight of faith, and there are people that just hate them because of it. Second major point here. Men seek satisfaction in riches and wealth. They seek satisfaction in riches and wealth. And notice the difference, okay? There are a lot of rich people in the Bible, right? Job was rich. Abraham was rich. Solomon was rich. Joseph of Arimathea was rich. See where I'm going to? Well, what was the difference? Their satisfaction was not being in being rich and being wealthy. Understand the point? That wasn't where their satisfaction was. Job wasn't satisfied because he had all that stuff. All that stuff was taken away from him, and what was he worried about? What did I do?
His family.
Well, yeah, he was worried about his family, but he was more concerned about his relationship with God. What did I do? What did I do that this happened? What did I do? Solomon saw riches and wealth, that they would become a cruel taskmaster. Now, do you manage your money, or does your money manage you? Does your wealth manage you, or do you manage your wealth? There's a difference in it, isn't it? Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 10 through 13. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money. Why not? Because the more he gets, the more he's going to want. He won't be satisfied. Nor he who loves wealth with his income. This is also vanity. And vanity means emptiness. You know, it's worthless. Okay? This satisfaction that comes with money and wealth is vanity because it won't work. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. Yeah. What's the old saying? You win the lottery and your relatives come crawling out of the woodwork. Yeah. Wealth increases and the people you got to feed come out. There they are. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Here it is, and then, oh man, I got all these relatives I didn't know I had. And they're all needy, right? They all need things, and they've got good excuses and good reasons for wanting my wealth, what have you. Verse 12, sweet is the sleep of a laborer. Yeah, when you go to bed tired because you worked all day, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. Why not? Because he's not satisfied. He's got to worry about his money. He's got to be worried about who's going to take it from him. Verse 13, there's a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt. To his hurt. I don't know, there's a Bible story about that, isn't there? Lazarus and the rich man. You know, when the rich man's talking with Abraham, Abraham's saying, hey, you know, back on earth you had all this good stuff, and Lazarus, he just wanted the crumbs that fell from your table. You could have done so much good. But there you did. Now you can flip that around too, right? Y'all notice that there was a man went into space this afternoon. Did you see that? You didn't see that? The Virgin Atlantic, Sir Richard, whatever his name is. I mean, what?
Musk? Is that Musk?
No, that's not Musk. Musk is going later. He's going on up further into space. This guy is the one who owns Virgin Atlantic. So he went in the space plane, went up, and he's a multi-millionaire. And Bernie Sanders is complaining about him. Okay? This multi-billionaire is going into space, and we got people here on the earth that are dying of starvation. They could be fed. But Bernie Sanders is a multi-millionaire. What's his problem? Probably he's not a multi-billionaire yet. Okay? And it's like, well, what kind of a country do we live in? I say this is a great country when a man can make a bunch of money, provide something that people want, and have money to do something like that to go into outer space. Because that might be the next big thing that produces something like one of these things. You know, there's more computing power in this than what was in the space shuttles. You know why we have these? Because of people wanting to go to the moon. Okay? You say, well, what a waste of money. How many people's lives have been improved by modern technology that was developed from things like that?
Just jobs.
Jobs that are provided. But yeah, looking down space on the fields for agriculture to help grow more food here. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Those things can work for good. They can work for evil, no doubt, but they can work for good. What's going to be the next thing that's going to happen to benefit humanity? Okay? And you think about the communication satellites that are out there. There's so much that has helped. Okay? And we have that because people are able to do that. And that's the freedom we have in this country. You don't see it.
I'd like to see Bernie's charitable giving for a year.
Yeah.
Right? All of those guys.
But again, this is not it's not meant to be a political statement. It's showing how that here's somebody who's rich, and it seems like, yeah, he's doing this because he's got money to waste. No. If the government was doing it, they'd still be flying the space shuttle, which was a hunk of junk. But now, you've got people putting their own money in it. Remember that about economics? Here's an economics lesson too, okay? About economics, if you're not paying for it and you're not getting the service, you don't care how much it costs or how good it is, right? And that's what happens when you got the government involved in it. Somebody else is paying for it, the taxpayers, and somebody else is getting it because you as the government, you got your own system. You want it to work. You don't care about the other systems. Okay, done. Done. Off my soapbox. I feel so much better.
Me too.
We must have some degree of wealth, but where is satisfaction? Where is it? Proverbs 30 and verse 8. Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food that is needful for me. That's needful. What do I need to sustain life? And there are people that waste more food than they could ever possibly need. They just waste it, you know? So, there's another passage, I forget just where it is, that it's like a prayer. Lord, make me not so poor that I have to steal, but not so rich that I become proud and, don't care about others. Don't depend upon you, Lord. There's that medium that we have to find. Again, listen to the Apostle Paul's admonition to Timothy. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 through 10. But godliness with contentment is great gain. What's that word gain? What realm does that fit into? Gain. I'm not talking about radio frequency gain. I'm talking, that's an accounting term, isn't it? That means good. You have gain or you have loss, profit and loss with gain. Godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world. This is quoting the Old Testament, I believe. And cannot take anything out of the world, quoting Job. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation. There's that desire, say, the satisfaction coming from having more and more and more, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Boy, it doesn't look like that guy going into outer space was in destruction. That didn't blow up or anything. But wait a minute. He's going to be judged the same as we are on the last day. Okay? And his money won't make a difference there. Won't make a difference. Excuse me. Verse 10. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. Number one example, Judas. For 40 pieces of silver, betrayed the Lord Jesus Christ. 40 pieces of silver. Excuse me. Number 3, men seek satisfaction in power. A man at the very height of his power is still a weak vessel indeed. Caesar, Julius Caesar, was at the height of his power. Brutus stabbed him in the back. John Kennedy was in the height of his power. ready to run for a second term. Lee Harvey Oswald. Weak vessel. It is not in man to successfully direct his own footsteps. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23. We need the Lord's input. A man cannot add 1 cubit, which is about 18 inches, to his own stature. Matthew 6:27. Sometimes it's translated a little differently. You couldn't add 18 more inches to your life. If you take your life, instead of measuring it in time, measuring it in steps, you know what that would be? Another 18 inches, that would be like another half step. Referees on the football field go by, a step's a yard, right? That's about a half step. Man is dependent on God for every material and spiritual blessing, is what James chapter 1, verse 17 tells us. Not just the spiritual blessings, but for the material blessings too. Why? Because he put it here. He put it here. He put the apple trees out here. Not Johnny Chapman, Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed helped, but God gave them to us. Right? It's all here because of God. Who put the gold in the ground? God did. Men fight for it. The streets of heaven would be paved with it. It's so worthless up there. Number 4, men seek satisfaction in knowledge. Worldly knowledge. And we'll be talking about this when we talk about the angels and the knowledge that they have. Knowledge is not evil. Some people believe it is. That's why one big religious group chained the Bible to the pulpit and told people you're not allowed to read it, as if they knew the language it was written in. They couldn't read it anyhow, right? But they wanted them ignorant so they could tell them, here's what you do. We'll tell you what it says, right? But the Bible tells us to study, to learn, to apply, and then teach that so that we can grow and others can grow. That's what God gave us His Word for. The problem is knowledge lacking God and lacking goodness. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 25, at the time when they knew God, they didn't want to keep God in their mind, in their memory, what have you. So they went and they created their own gods, patterned after themselves, and then after birds, animals, and what have you, and created the idolatry. Some people say that ignorance is bliss. Yeah, what you don't know will hurt you. Ecclesiastes 1:18, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. That's what the world says. You go back and you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, and Solomon is saying, here's what the world says, and I tested that out, and now here's what God says. And here's what I found out really brings you satisfaction. Fear God. Keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. And that takes what? Studying, learning, applying, teaching, growing. John chapter 8, verse 31-32, we talked about that just not too long ago in a sermon. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in Him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that's what a lot of people are afraid of. And that's why they want the Bible taken away from people. Don't want us studying the Bible. They don't want us to know the truth about them, that they are evil. Number 5, men seek satisfaction in position or status. Well, what's wrong with that? People need smart people like us to tell them what to do, right? Well, some people have that attitude. And yeah, there is a degree where we need to be helpful to people, mindful of what God has given us to help people, but remembering that every human being is created in the image of God. And we shouldn't want to make anybody a slave any more than what we would want to be enslaved ourselves. That may not come out just exactly right, but I think you get the point. You know, the higher up the flagpole the monkey climbs, the more it is behind, you see. And that's what happens out here. You see some of these politicians, and the higher they go, you see how either corrupt or inept that they are. Judges chapter 9 kind of talks about that. Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, or Gideon. Gideon was a great guy, a great judge. But apparently when Gideon passes, Gideon has so many sons, and of course nobody was supposed to be king in Israel at that time. But this Abimelech thought, hey, I'm the son of Gideon, and he was the judge. I ought to be somebody important. And you go back and you read the story about Abimelech. He was not someone suited to be a leader, and especially a leader of God's people. So there's a danger in acquiring positions that we're not capable of handling. It's like cream rises to the top, but you know, some people think they're cream when they're the sediment, the dregs at the bottom. Now, position, status, consider Nicodemus. John chapter 3, right? John chapter 3. This isn't a man who wasn't a good leader, couldn't have been a good leader. He was a good leader. But because of his status, he came to Jesus by night. He didn't want people apparently to know that he was coming to talk to Jesus. Why? Well, because he was a member of the Sanhedrin. And he was influential. He was a good person. But he didn't want people to know he was talking with Jesus. And he had some good things to say about Jesus. Okay. So, you know, and that's kind of like, you know, if you're a leader, you've got to stand up for something. Well, what's that song came out several years ago? If you never stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Yeah. Well, later, after Jesus is taken, arrested, and beaten, and crucified, he comes with Joseph of Arimathea to beg for the body of Jesus to give it a decent burial. They took the death of Jesus for him to stand up and say, no, no more. I'm standing for something. Because he was afraid that he would lose that status, that position. But apparently, I could see him becoming a leader in the church. He'd be like the Apostle Paul. Saul of Tarsus, see, he gave something up. He had a lot of power too. He gave that up. But look what he gained. Something about the crucified body of Jesus changes men's ideas about status, about what we need to be in the world. Matthew chapter 20, verse 26 and 27. Jesus told his apostles, disciples of his, it shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Now, that doesn't mean we sell ourselves out. That means we become like a slave, serving one another. That's the status, that's the position when you're talking about being a follower of Jesus Christ. So, conclusion. A man can never be truly satisfied until his ideal is attained. If we go to our deathbed, because we've seen testimonies of this from numbers of people on their deathbed, they're just not satisfied because they thought they could attain something, but they didn't do it. Whatever it is, they didn't make enough money, they didn't get the power that they thought they were going to, the political position, whatever. They weren't quite successful in business like they wanted to be. And they come to their deathbed and, oh, my life has been wasted, right? It's because they're not satisfied, or not seeking satisfaction in the right thing. Now, David had all 5 of the blessings that we talked about in his life, right? He had all that stuff. He had power. He had riches. He had everything. Probably more than that even. But he found no lasting, fulfilling satisfaction in them apart from his relationship with God. It was the relationship with God that made all those things satisfying. And if he'd have been a shepherd boy all of his life, you know what? He'd have still been satisfied because of his relationship with God. So let's get into the fight of our lives against the things that will lead us away from God. Be fighters. Fight against them. Fight the good fight like the Apostle Paul told Timothy. Anyway, that's our lesson for tonight. That may have been a little bit long, but you didn't have anything else to do, right? Thank you for your time and your attention. If you have a need, let your request be made known as we stay in the same